We are recording, so just let this shit fly. Sorry, everybody, I didn't capture our preamble talk, but it was exactly what you think it would be with our guests. This week, we have Rob Schwalb and Stephen Radney-MacFarland.
Hail Satan.
Hail
Between
Satan,
the two of
everyone.
them with our superhero guest, Zach Glazer.
Yeah.
I am his faithful sidekick, Skeeter Green.
Right before the show, I know these guys have done a lot of things, but I went to the RPG Geek list of the things they'd worked on, and there's about 48 pages between them of stuff.
Yeah,
and,
I don't even fucking want to be here right now. I mean,
well,
these guys make us look terrible.
Well, I don't even feel like I look terrible. I feel awesome, just to annoy him. But I was asking Stephen before we started the show, I'm like, tell me, on Polyhedron 178, what is your opinion on working on that? And he was... Because
I drank all of that shit away.
No, you guys
Deer in the
have done so many
headlights.
things. You guys have done so many things. It just amazes me that you can remember doing any of them.
Yeah, it's a lot of, and we're still doing a lot of shit. It's
absolutely.
nuts. Yeah,
A ton. So I want to jump right in. We're going to jump in with Rob since he's the new fresh meat. He has never been on the show. Mr. Schwalb, I'm going to ask you one question, and then we're just going to go off on a fucking tangent.
All right, my asshole is puckered in excitement.
Tell us your first RPG experience in gaming. I don't want this to be any kind of backroom sexual encounter. I want this to be. We'll get to that later. That's a pay channel.
Okay. All right. So sorry, Helga, you're going to have to wait for the next dungeon conversation. All right. But my first gaming experience, I've told this story a few times, so I'll tell it to you. You can pass it on to whoever the fuck wants to hear it again. But here it is. So it was a cold, no, it was a warm day in Tennessee. It was not a lot of rain, and there was dust blowing around, and it was the end of the year, and the sun just pounded on my head like a fucking hammer. And so I was wandering in my backyard, just filled with existential dread. And I was 10, and so I'm walking around, and my neighbor comes up and says, you talked about that you wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. I've got this module thing. And I said, what is a module? And he's like, I don't know what a module is. But he hands me this saddle stitched, and for the kids at home, that means there are staples and hold it together, and a green cover. And on the
Thank you, old man Schwalb.
There's this elven chick and a Black Panther thing, and there's some Rahazia thing on the thing. It's Tracy and Laura Hickman. And he said, I'll sell it to you for $25. And so I said, I just happen to have $25 because I inherited Judas's 30 pieces of silver. And so I just handed him one and doomed him to damnation and trouble ever after. But so I got the module, and I figured out what a role-playing game is from it, and created my first role-playing game. And that was called Passages. And I ran that in the playground for about 20 kids, 15 kids, and this other kid named Landon, who was just as nerdy as I was, said, hey, do you want to actually play D&D? And that's how I got into it.
That was such a fantastic retelling. You need to just drop completely out of Facebook and just have audiobooks of all the posts you make.
It was all the dust.
And just, I mean,
got me.
It was fucking perfect.
I was there.
I expected the sky to part and like angels fucking everywhere and just all
angels.
kinds of stuff.
Or ground apart.
Yeah, the ground cracks open. Oh, man. That was amazing. Steven, I don't remember if we gave you that question.
I don't think you did, but I'm not sure.
Do it. Go, man.
All right. I'm not going to be able to do it with the flair or even the exercise
you could.
of Rob. But I had just moved from the East Coast to the Bay Area of California. My father was transferred there. He's a federal police officer. And they dragged my ass to a birthday party with kids that I didn't know. It was one of my dad's coworkers' sons who was about my age and everything else. And I walk in, and I'm like, well, there's going to be fucking cake and ice cream, so that should be great. and they were all crouched around the table playing with weird die. And they're like, Steven's here for the birthday party. And they're like, give him one of the crappy characters. And so they gave me
Trial by fire.
one of the henchmen. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And they're like, this is Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, oh, great. What the hell is this? And so they started playing the game, told me what dice to roll and everything else. I had no idea what I was doing. But it was the best time I'd ever had playing a game. And we were playing against the Giants. We were in the setting of the Hill Giant Chief. And so this is the 80s. I was about 11. And they were throwing morning stars because they thought morning stars were ninja stars. So everybody
one does.
I throw my morning star. And then I picked up my bow and I shot a giant. Everybody's like, the bow sucks. And then I killed the giant and everybody cheered. And I'm like, I don't know what the fuck just happened, but I was down. And I went home, tore out all of my battleship things to make them GM screens, stole all the Yahtzee dice in the house, made my own system until I could get the books, and then just devoured everything I could find on D&D and related subjects. And it's been that way ever since.
So the interesting thing both of you guys mentioned in your first taste of role playing is you both said immediately you made your own games.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, you said it. Stephen, you said it. Is there a different creative impetus for you guys, or do you think the game mechanics as presented initially just suck? I mean, that's a harsh way to put it, but I mean, did you look at the game and go, I can do better than this?
I didn't have the game.
Yeah, I didn't have it. Was access. I mean, it was, I was in the South, and there was, this is the land of cousin fuckery. So,
dude, half of my family is from West Tennessee. I feel you, brother.
Right.
But now things make more sense.
Yeah, there just wasn't a lot of it going around. I mean, and getting the rules required, my parents to cough up the shekels to make that happen. And, so I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to do the thing, I had to make my own.
Did you find that when you actually got a hold of the rules, and if you've been making your own for a while, were you either disappointed or was a revelation, or do you remember having any opinion between what you've been doing versus what you saw?
Gygax's writing made me like, at that period of time when I finally got the rules and I started to read them, I'm like, 11, 12-year-old kid, because back then you bought the basic set for two things: to get the dice and for the Caves of Chaos and keep on the Borderland. Like the rest of the stuff, they're like, why is Alpha class? Like, we're going to go for advanced.
I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, well, and it's another show. We can talk about why ancestries and races were classes. And then you got the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, and I got all three of them for Christmas one year. And my mom was doing some graduate study, and so she used to just shunt me in the library, and I went to the Oxford Dictionary because there were like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 words on each page where I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck that means.
And some weren't even real.
And so, yeah, right.
What's a magocracy?
So but it was so dense and so intoxicating that when I finally got the rules, I was all like, oh, these little 6-sided dice, very simple rules that I'm making just aren't going to cut it. I need to understand this. And I just delved in with both feet, which made me appreciate rules design. Even though sometimes I look back at that game and I'm like, I don't know how we played it, right? There's so much.
Oh, yeah. We never did. We played a scaled down version of the rules that we kind of understood and skipped the rest. But I don't think it's a playable game as is. At least not.
No. I agree with you up to but
we could all 4 of us sit down and play it, and we could get it and understand it because we've seen this stuff forever and around it. But I think for 4 guys to pick it up today and get those 3 rule books, I don't know how much of it would be as accessible.
Well, what's interesting, what's interesting about that era too was that because let me put a pin in that. Well, actually, let me talk about that first. Was that there wasn't, and Stephen, you used this expression in the past, and I'm going to steal it from you for this because fuck it.
Right.
D&D wasn't.
We steal from each other all the time.
Yeah, D&D wasn't a religion.
I've heard him say "fuck it" too.
D&D wasn't the religion of the book yet, right?
Right.
There wasn't a way to play that was codified. In fact, if everybody had a binder full of not just women, but also house rules. So they had a binder full of house rules and stuff that you clip from Dungeon Magazine, Dragon Magazine, or the stuff you make up on your own. Now, I mean, I know that I was such a psycho about rules stuff that by the time I was winding down playing first edition, which I would have been a senior in high school, and that was well after second edition came out, we were still tracking ammunition. We were still using weapons versus armor type. We were using segments, turns.
That's hardcore.
All the rules that we could use.
Weapon speed, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing we didn't use were the pummeling and overbearing rules because those are moving targets.
Yeah.
And you can't, like, there is no score that you could say definitively, this is my pummeling score, because it all depends on everything else that's going on around it. So you're calculating it constantly. It's exciting mechanic. But,
it was basically who could debate the best. Yes, I think my score works in this case.
Right.
You know, if you could say that commanding enough, it's like, fuck it, okay.
Yeah, it was an early version of Fate that was much more complicated.
Yeah.
Well, I find that I think we have a lot of lawyers that are our age now that play D&D because that's how you first learn to look at like a codified set of rules, but argue that there's 5 ways to look at it. And then you could be a giant asshole, now they get paid money for it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I have vivid memory of an extended argument about the tensile strength of something or other when you're being held by the hold person spell, and should you truly be helpless in face it, when it's really just like, I don't know what we're having an argument about. I mean, it's pretty clear, like in hindsight, that you're just fucked, buddy.
You don't know any lawyers, man.
Yeah. I mean, that should have been the asterisk on like every page. You're just fucked, buddy. I mean, so Rob, when did you decide after playing this game that some man gave you in the backyard,
some cousin man,
that you were actually, you wanted to do this? You wanted to create and you wanted to be a part of this whole big, what eventually becomes a mythos / religion in its own right.
Like by being a participant in the gaming as a gamer or as working in it professionally?
Let's go with the working professionally.
That was, I think that would have been the spring of 2002. And it was a foolish and tragic decision. One I have rued these many years.
We could all share that story. But yeah.
It wasn't, I don't think I realized that I was doing this for real until probably 2012.
So how did you start in 2002?
I had graduated. So I'd gone to college, dropped out of college, and then went back to college after I got married. Wrapped up college, and I had grand, hilarious, naive visions. I'm going to become a novelist because that's what I can do. I can write papers. So I decided I was going to be a novelist. And look at all the gamers. They're satisfied with the games I'm running. I'm so brilliant. But so I decided that I was going to become a novelist while working working at a liquor store and selling carpeting and hardwood flooring and stuff like that. And there was a D20 company because in 2002 there was such a demand. There were more companies than there were writers, and there was such a hunger for people who could put nouns in front of verbs or vice versa that they would take anything. And so there was an open call from.
That's how I got in.
Yeah. There was a British company, Mongoose Publishing, and they had an open call. Don't ever look these books up; they're terrible. But I pitched a book. I actually pitched several books, and then they bought one. It took a year for it to come out, and then shortly after it came out, I got hired by Green Ronin Publishing, which is also hilarious. But you know, there it is. So I did a ton of freelance. I remember the first show I went to was Origins, and I went and glad-handed every publisher there, not once, but 3 times, and bought meals and talked to people and pretend to be interested and all that stuff. And it was easily the most terrifying and gut-wrenching experience of my life.
So we are currently sharing the your webpage. I don't know if you guys can see it. I don't know what you guys see.
I seen awesome something.
There's Demon Lord and some adventures and some words and stuff. And
hey, I see all your favorites. NFL, Capital One Credit. Awesome, dude. You don't have any porn there. That's just
no.
Oh, PayPal, send money. You can send money to me.
Yeah, anytime.
Well, social distancing says you can't get money. That's what I read.
Whoa.
Whoa, hey.
You guys are the worst.
Cool.
I know.
Steven, same question.
So, of course, being kind of an idiot kid, I definitely wanted to work in gaming. Although when I was younger, I was mostly interested in doing art. You know, the Elmore and Parkinson and Eastleigh and everything else were just amazingly. They were like a revelation to me, and I was always the kid in class who couldn't stay in the lines, but you know, I'd turn the paper over and start drawing and everything else. And I ran a lot of games and everything else, but it wasn't until high school that I joined the newspaper at high school, and they made me write something, and they're like, oh my God, this is so good. And I'm like, I just want to do illustrations and stuff. And they're like, no, you need to write. And I'm like, okay. And then, you know, I went to college a bit late because I couldn't afford college. And then basically I had to emancipate myself from my parents' finances before I could go to college and everything else, and studied history and philosophy. And I was still involved with gaming, and I became involved with the RPGA and TSR Online and everything else, and learned that I wasn't the only geek who had all of these fascinations. And then eventually, after I graduated, I was working for Kinko's, and they moved me out as a manager of technology for this new shop that they were opening right in the middle of the .com boom. And I did that for a long period of time. And then a friend of mine, Jeff Quick, who I met through the RPGA, who worked at Wizards, was all like, Steven, we have this this opening in the RPGA. You should apply for it. I think you'd be really great for it. And I was like, all right. So I applied. I didn't get it, strangely enough, although it was like a period of time where they were about to give it to me, and then I heard just silence from them and everything else. And I'm like, I'm making bank doing work for .com boom. People saw a lot of crazy shit before the crash. And then they ended up giving that job to Eric Mona. And I was like, oh, yeah. I'm like, oh, that makes sense, right? Like, I know Eric by reputation and everything else. And I knew that Living Greyhawk was coming along the way and whatnot. And so Eric starts working really hard, doing a lot of great work for that. And he's all of a sudden like, I need help. And they were like, well, we were going to hire this guy, Steven, right? Maybe we can get him to come help. And so I started working at Wizards just at the launch of 3rd edition in 2000. And pretty soon I worked on Polyhedron and Living Greyhawk magazine and the Living Greyhawk campaign with Eric. And then Hasbro decided to split things up. Eric went up into periodicals, and they're like, Steven, you're in charge of Living Greyhawk. And I'm like, the fuck? And basically ran that campaign and the RPGA content for a great many years, until I was sick of having 6 bosses with conflicting ideas and everything else, and then I quit. I was like, I'm sorry, like, this is getting too stupid, and I quit. Sold a lot of collectibles online and played World of Warcraft for about 6 months, until I got a call from Wizards, and they said, hey, you want to come work at R&D? And I went, yeah, okay. And worked in R&D for altogether, I worked for Wizards for 9 years, and then got laid off, because eventually that's what happens when you work at Wizards.
That's what I read.
And then
Christmas
Paizo's like,
crucifixion.
yep. And then Paizo went, Steven, you want to work on this thing called the Advanced Player's Guide that we're doing? And I'm like, sure. And then I did that as a
Warcraft
freelance.
wasn't working anymore.
I was all like, I at that point in time, when I was working in R&D, I started teaching game design classes in Seattle at various places. So I had teaching gigs and everything else. But then I was doing freelance for Paizo, and I did like 2 or 3 books for them. And they're like, you want to come in the office every day and work for us? And I went, sure. And then I worked there for 9 years. And then I was all like, yeah, I'm going to go work for myself.
So you got about a 9-year calendar.
I got about a 9-year calendar. And then after 9 years, it's like, nah, time to go do something else.
So Rob, before you got on, Zach was going on and on and on and on and on and on about your pages of development and the shit you have worked on. Please walk us through that vast forest of paper you have produced. And I don't mean
Which one do you hate the
individually.
most? No, I'm kidding.
I don't mean
Wow.
like every individual project, but
Sure.
I mean, just let people know, because people know you now for Shadow, but you have done so much.
Yeah, well, it started early because I was hungry for work in the early days. I guess it was 2002, 03. I was taking on every job I could get. And so I worked on World's Largest Dungeon. I worked, if you guys remember that from back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
I have a copy.
You did Trouble at Durbanford for Necromancer Games.
Yep, I sure did. I also worked on a thing for Kingdoms of Kalimar, and then I did. I think probably the thing I was best known for at the start of my career was Grimm, which was published by Fantasy Flight, which was a game where you play kids who get sucked into a twisted fairy tale thing. It was done. That book came out before that whole thing became super trite. So it was exciting then. Now it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, come up with something original. But Chris Pramus and I met at Origins. I had pitched him a book called The Unholy Warrior's Handbook. Also, please don't look it up. Where
I have it in my shelf right behind my screen.
That's sweet. I wanted to do an anti-paladin for D&D, and I didn't think the Blackguard was big enough. And so he bought the book, and then that brought me into the Book of Fiends. And then I remember we were gaming in my basement, and I got a phone call from him, and he's like, "Hey, we want to bring you on as a line developer for our D20 line because I'm shifting gears to do Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition." And I had already guessed that they were going to be working on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition, which surprised Chris. I mean, he was, "How did you know?" And I was like, "I just guessed." So he brought me on for that, and that was cool. But D20 was kind of already dying off at that point. So I managed the advanced books, and then I did a bunch of masterclass and other things like that. But Green Ronin's policy was that you could do as much freelance as you wanted to, while you are working, as long as you could maintain the standards that they expected. Well, so I was still doing some freelance work for Paradigm Concepts and Fantasy Flight. I worked on some Midnight books, and I worked on some Arcanist books and and a couple other things here and there. And then Chris handed over the reins to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second, and so I took over development for that. And that happened right at Realms of Sorcery. So I pretty much took over that game from that point on, almost to the end, while he was working on Dark Heresy. And then at a Gen Con, Rodney Thompson introduced me to Chris Perkins. And I didn't think the meeting went well, but apparently it went well enough. And I landed my first Wizards of the Coast gig on Tome of Magic, where I was kind of the fill-in writer. I wrote all the encounters and all the other stuff. And then I got steady work for Wizards for a long time there. Now, back with Green Ronin, I also designed A Song of Ice and Fire role-playing. That is
also on my shelf.
Oh, nice. I was the consultant developer on Dark Heresy, and I'm looking at my shelf. I mean, I worked on Black Company. I did Thieves World.
Also on my shelf.
Sweet. So I mean, I
I'll
was pretty
stop
much
now.
I was pretty much all over the place. There were a couple of companies I hadn't worked for yet at that time that I really wanted to, but it just didn't pan out. So then doing freelance for Wizards, I was involved in almost every book for the tail end of third edition's run. I mean, it was ridiculous. I was getting a project every month. And so it was right before fourth edition came out. I flew up to Seattle with Rodney Thompson, and we went to do a big meeting that weekend where they wanted to hire us both. And I couldn't do it because my wife is pretty much anchored here in Tennessee. So he took the job as a Star Wars developer, and I became a contract designer for them. And so I was with Wizards throughout the life of fourth. And then my career kind of with Wizards wound down with fifth edition. I was part of the design team for that game and produced a pretty fun edition of D&D. And that was that.
I think I noticed.
I went on my own.
I have a question going back a little ways for you, just out of curiosity. I own the Song of Ice and Fire stuff too. And just what was your experience working on licensed properties versus when you're working with more open things like Dungeons and Dragons? We're talking about ones that are specifically based on IP that wasn't designed for RPGs. Would you have fun doing it? Were you able to bring life to it, or would you find it really difficult to work within the framework that the licensed people required? You can talk unspecific to Song of Ice and Fire.
I've worked on 4 licensed properties. I did Thieves World, Black Company, Song of Ice and Fire, and I also did Shotguns and Sorcery for Matt Forbeck. Shotguns and Sorcery is different because Matt Forbeck is at heart a gamer, and he knows that, so that was different. And Thieves World was a bit different too, because Lynn Abbey knows enough about Dungeons and Dragons that she was able to kind of engage. Glenn Cook doesn't know anything about D&D and doesn't really care. So there was kind of a lot of hands off on his part. There are a couple approaches that people take to it. Some people think that you use the source material as a starting point and you add to it, and then you have my view, which is you don't create anything outside of what the author has already created. You never, ever, ever as a designer get to color outside the lines. And the reason I feel that way is because people aren't buying Game of Thrones for Rob Schwalb's thoughts on Game of Thrones. They're buying Rob Schwalb's interpretation of Game of Thrones, which needs to be true to the books. Everything that happens in the books and everything that's true about his world has to be true in the game. There's just no... And if the players want to do whatever they want to do, or the customer wants to do whatever they want to do, I don't care. If you want to put unicorns and fucking dragon men in your Song of Ice and Fire game, go fucking for it. And I really recommend if you do put Dragonborn in Game of Thrones, make sure your Dragonborn lay their eggs and their victims. But that aside...
I will absolutely do that.
Make sure. I feel like working on D&D is the same thing. D&D is not as flexible of a property as one might think. And I think that largely changed once. I think if you're ever working on Eberron or Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, I understand that being different with a setting based.
Because Forgotten Realms is so integrated in with 5th edition D&D right now. I know they're not as rigorous about it as they probably should be, because Forgotten Realms cosmology is very well detailed, and you have to have an encyclopedia. You have to have like a Rich Baker style mind to keep all the stuff straight. It's difficult for me to, work on D&D and think I can break new ground. And I think whenever D&D really goes too far off, it gets the audience reacts. I mean, you go back to 4th edition Shard Mines, for example. Nobody wanted Shard Mines in D&D. Nobody wants crystal people running around. But it was a cool idea because it was a great idea for making miniatures that are transparent. But it's not a really good idea for a character because no one wants it. People want the same thing over and over again with D&D. They want, or they want to be able to play cat people, apparently, and they want whatever the fuck they want in D&D. I don't know. But I felt like with D&D, you are bound by whatever the popular conception of the game is at that moment. And I'm probably wrong. But that was my experience.
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think that's a very professional way to look at it because you're being hired to maintain a property. And I think that that's a way to treat it that is, people don't often think of people who are working as freelancer contract workers actually doing. So I think it's cool to hear. Oh, and real quick, you talk about Matt Forbeck, and I just want to say Matt Forbeck doesn't know this, but I play VR games called Beat Saber, and his name is in front of mine on almost every fucking song. So I hate that guy. I swear to God, I see his scores always 2,000 above mine. I work at it every day, and Forbeck's still there staring at me. I've never even met him, but I don't like him. So,
well, my shout out to Matt. I love you, Matt.
But he won't watch this, but it's okay.
So
If he does, I'm coming.
You don't know. He might eventually watch one of these. Somebody might, out of the 12 people we have that watch these fucking shows, we might get some airplay.
No, but yeah, I'm sorry about the interruption, but I had to. You triggered you crossed my little line because I see his name every day staring at me. I'm a loser.
And I kind of agree with Rob and kind of don't, which is kind of the nature of our relationship. So when I was working on Living Greyhawk, I remember one of my circle members, which is a great guy from Raging Swan Press, now Creighton Broadhurst. We were having this phone call argument, and he's like, "Steven, you can't do this because in Greyhawk Wars it has X, Y, and Z." And I'm like, "You do know we make this shit up, right?" I'm like, "Sergeant made that shit up. We're going to make shit up." Like, I agree. We have to confront that, right? We have to find a way to put this in that context. But sometimes you do have to break new ground, because while some people like it over and over again, this is now a multi-generational game. You don't know what the next group of people are going to latch onto. Like, every single time the monk comes into D&D, "Oh, you've ruined the game. You can't have the monk." Yeah, we still have the fucking
every
monk.
single time
the
is right.
half-orc. We can't play half-orcs. Good drow. What are you talking about? Oh my God, Dragonborn, you fucked this shit up. And people are still playing Dragonborn. So you can break new ground, but you do have to know when you create new ground that sometimes you're going to have to jettison it because it just doesn't gain traction.
I mean, I totally agree. And what I'm really speaking towards was more towards licensed properties, right? I think or rather the worlds of D&D as they are. I think that with Greyhawk's a big messy. I'm going to set that aside, but because it's such a mess, right? I mean,
again, professional right there, because I knew he wanted to say.
Because I adore Greyhawk, and I
love
adore the complexity, but I am daunted by the amount of stuff that came out for Living Greyhawk. And Creighton Broadhurst, man, that guy knows his shit.
Yes, he does.
And if I was in charge of D&D, the very first thing we would do would be hire Creighton Broadhurst to be the guy who runs the whole Greyhawk thing, and then we get back to basics and say this is the game. But that's just me. My thing was that I really, really hated Dragonborn in the early days of 4th edition. I really, really hated it. But I eventually came around to the point when I recognized the fact that fantasy is something that is different to all sorts of people. And you know what? Some kids want to play fucking dragon men that lay their eggs in their victims. They want to throw up fire and lightning and do all this stuff. That's totally fine, right?
Yep.
It doesn't have to be in my games. It doesn't have to even, if I am running 4th edition, then sure, why the fuck not? Because that's part of the identity of 4th edition. And with 5th edition, we were really aware of the fact that I think that I love 4th edition for a lot of reasons. I don't like 4th edition for a lot of other reasons. But what I do like about 4th edition is that it had its own identity. It did what it did really, really well. With 5th edition, I felt like there was some level of us trying to prove to the audience that we were good custodians of their brand. And whether or not that's real or not, it was kind of my goal and impetus behind the work that I did in that game, which was to say, if it appeared in the player's handbook, we should really at least take a good look at making sure it's in the player's handbook for this edition. Which is why you see gnomes and dragonborn and tieflings and other things in that game in 5th edition that you probably wouldn't see in a purist D&D product. But it's because it's trying to be more inclusive and be more of an umbrella game to kind of collect all of the different approaches to D&D over the years and put it in one thing. Of course, I've lost my train of thought. Let's drink beer.
Okay, I've got a question that might kind of coalesce all these different trains into one giant wreck. As game designers, you have, Rob, you've mentioned the Dragonborn. 5th edition has the Tiefling. Stephen brought up the Monk. Do you think those fit kind of an archetype of things that draw players that want to jump on the other characters that are like playing the standard dwarf fighter or the elven magic user? Do you think those are a draw to a subset of players that like, ooh, I want the cool advantage that these guys don't have, so they're drawn to those kind of fringier elements? Or am I full of shit?
You take it, Steve.
I think so. When you have basically a broad swath of player options, which you really do want it, what you really are doing is trying to find something that will grab as many people as possible. Like
Right.
there's that guy who just wants to play the dwarf fighter, and he might look at the monk and go, "Oh, that's dumb." But somebody else who grew up watching a whole bunch of kung fu movies or whatnot, they're absolutely going to want to play the monk.
I always want to play Monk, and no one will ever let me play it.
No, what do you do? Like, why won't anybody let you play a monk? Do you
He's
play
an
with a whole
asshole.
bunch of? Oh, well, all right.
Well, I mean, there's that, but that's any character I play, honestly. So
I mean, in a lot of ways, fantasy is a language that has a lot of dialects, and what you're trying
Right.
to do is make sure all those dialects can come and communicate with one another. And it's a power fantasy, right? Mostly on the player side. On the GM side, it's more of a creation fantasy. But every single player wants something a little bit different out of the game within the construct of what the GM's creating. And so, if you get a younger kid who looks at like, oh, I can play a dwarf or an elf or a halfling. I want to play something weird. Can I play something weird? And as game designers, we have to go, yes, you can, and make sure that weird isn't so weird that it doesn't fit within everybody's else's idea of what that is. And that changes over time. Like the monk when that first came out. And I think I had a talk with Jason Bullman when we were doing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and he's like, "Yeah, I really don't like the monk in my fantasy," and I understand that argument, but that's bullshit. It's not your fantasy. Like, we're creating the fantasy so a lot of people can jump on board and have as much fun with it as possible. If you want to run your own game, you get your 5 or 6 friends sitting around the table and just do that. But when you're creating a game, you're not creating the game you want to make necessarily. You're creating a game that is within your skill set, within your desire, but will grab as many people as possible who can create the stories that they want to play.
Well,
okay, no, I have to jump in. Sorry, Zach.
No worries.
So when you're saying that, does that differ from a game rules mechanic? Like when you're making Pathfinder,
Yep.
that is 100% valid, and I follow that. If you're writing an adventure set in there, do the same criteria apply? Do you have to write it for a broad swath, or can you write it, this is the adventure I always wished I could play?
It depends on how much traction that adventure has. Like, you can create an adventure that you just want to play, and you have to ask yourself, how quirky is my imagination? Like, is it gonna gravitate towards a lot of people? Are they going to get the adventure hooks? Like in the RPGA on the early days, there was a whole bunch of inside jokes between small groups of people, and as soon as that adventure went out to a broader audience, all of us were going, what the fuck is this? Like, there's nothing in here that makes sense to me because I'm not involved with those inside jokes. And so one of the things when I was involved with the RPGA, I was all like, you've got to take out these weird Easter eggs and these jokes, right? I want butts and seats. It's my job to make sure as many people play in an organized play system as possible. And when nobody knows the joke except for your hometown group of friends, that's a barrier to entry. So even when writing adventures, especially published adventures, you need to take a look and tear down those barriers. Either that or somebody might go, that's an interesting adventure, but I'm not quite sure what they were doing there. or at least communicate the joke, right?
Well, it actually segues into what I wanted to ask before Skeeter brutally interrupted me as he normally does.
I told you I'm an asshole.
I don't disagree. I work with you on this. For both you guys, because you have done both stints as in the bigger companies as the contract worker for Wizards and at Wizards and Paizo, what is your opinion on the open gaming license and how that affected the overall arc of what was getting made by both big companies and small companies? When you saw it, what did you think was a good idea? Did it change the way people approached smaller projects? Did you happy to see it so you wouldn't have to write some of the crap that was coming out? I mean,
how did you start this, Rob?
Sure, because I mean, I think the OGL was so powerful because it allowed me to make this my career.
Yeah, I agree.
So I on the one hand, I feel like, yeah, that was something incredible, and it changed my life. On the other hand, as a consumer of role-playing games, I think it's bullshit. Because what basically happened was that it just gave everybody the same fucking McDonald's experience in role-playing. It sucked all the creativity out of the hobby. I mean, you look back to the universe that was pre-OGL, and you had all sorts of different game systems that were out there. You know, you look at a post-OGL system, it's like Twilight 2000 could not be. It couldn't exist. But that was a niche that had an audience that really loved the fuck out of that game.
It was great.
And you can't do that. You couldn't do that game in the early 2000s. Fourth edition's GSL was probably the saving grace of our entire fucking hobby, because what happened was that no one did anything for the GSL, so designers either said, "Oh wait, I'm just a fucking hole filler, and the only thing I'm good at is making feet, so I guess I can't work in this field anymore, and I'm going to go do something else I'm better suited for." Or you fucking figured out how to be a game designer and you did the work. And it was, so that could have been a period of really rich innovation. Now we are the 5th edition OGL, and I'm just, we've got the Dungeon Masters Guild, which is fantastic as a resource for fan created content. And I know a lot of people are making okay money at it, and that's A+ great. And I still see stuff that's coming out that's 5th edition powered. No idea how that works, but whatever. The point is that I think that at the time, it opened doors to people to getting into the industry that otherwise would never have been able to get into. Ever, ever, ever. Because there are more astronauts than there are people that are working full-time in this business. I mean, it's that level of...
We've said that repeatedly.
Yeah, I've heard that. The exact same one. You're absolutely correct. And I tell people ask me, I'm like, I fell into it and I don't think you could repeat it.
Yeah, so that was a great moment, but it almost destroyed role-playing, because when you see Deadlands D20, when you see every Traveler D20, or T20 as it was called, and you're seeing the raft of things are trying to fit into that mold, it sucked all the creativity out of what was going on and what was bubbling in the early 90s, where you see games that would just do the thing, that you get game mechanics to tell the fucking story you want to tell. Not everything has to be part of this giant kind of matrix of math that you've got to have 23 ranks of use rope in order to fucking figure out the thing in your cyberpunk hack bullshit. Fuck that. The game you want to make, and use a system and don't try to marry it to fucking D20 because you think you're going to carve off 5 assholes who are thinking like, oh, I want to bring this shit in my D&D game.
What do you really think, Rob?
Well,
this is the interview I wanted to have. So this is what I wanted to capture.
I got 2 more 6-packs in the fridge, so we have to take a break.
So
we got plenty of tape, man.
Rob and I have disagreements on this. I think the OGL was absolutely brilliant. And the reason why the OGL was brilliant is because it took out all of the litigation strategy that earlier game companies were doing, and not rightly so. here's the thing about it. Like, the protection for game mechanics is slim to none. You need to get patents for that shit. And the last people to be able to do that was Wizards of the Coast with the tapping mechanism. And even now, patent lawyers are like, that was a mistake, right? You can't patent that. And so I remember being on TSR Online, I used to have knockdown, drag out arguments with Sean K. Reynolds back when he was the community manager on that thing, about like, you're saying that we can't do this, but your books tell us to do this. We can't advertise our games, but you tell us to go to the local game store and put up a placard, right? These are contradictory sort of things. And so when Ryan Dancy, who I don't particularly care as a human being or a thinker, right, came out with the OGL, I looked at it, I'm like, that's the exact kind of thing that games need. It needs to, because if you were trying to publish a game in the 90s or even a game supplement, you were bombarded with legislation. There's a reason why Magic the Gathering had Wizards of the Coast, but it also had Deck Builder. And it's because they could spin that off, because at the time Wizards of the Coast was being sued by multiple companies for copyright infringement because they were using similar or other game mechanics. I think every single game that comes out should have an OGL or some sort of version to do that. Because the thing about it is, a game designer, you create a system, you put it out there so people can tell their own stories, let them share those stories. Now, the point that Rob makes about the D20 system and kind of the foolishness that went on there is because a lot of companies didn't realize that they could do something very similar with their own mechanics. And they wanted to gobble up, everybody was buying D20, they wanted to gobble up some part of that market, and they failed because the strength of their system was basically destroyed by trying to latch it onto the D20 system. But games and game mechanics should be open. That's how we make better games in the long run. And you can't protect them anyway. The illusion that you can is just, it's because you had a bunch of gamers, you can bully people.
With lawyers, but you really can't. No one's going to go to court and win a court battle because no one can afford to, because there's no money to actually.
Unless you have a big company like TSR used to do that shit all the time.
Yeah.
So like if with Demon Lord, right? Demon Lord used the D20 for you roll a D20, your target number is 10, or the score of the thing that you're going to do. But like, I've got a couple of things in my game that are very particular to Demon Lord, boons and banes, and the initiative system. I'm not chasing down anybody for taking that shit, because I know I can't do anything about the mechanics. So what the fuck do I care?
Right.
Lancer is a game that's basically, it's got enough Demon Lord in it that I should have fucking published it, but whatever, it's fine, because people are going to, and I look at it as, if I do something cool and clever as a game designer that is useful to the audience, it's going to get out there no matter what.
Yeah.
I don't have to have some legalese bullshit and then just say everyone else can do what Mongoose did, which is take the OGL and print it with a faux-looking Henry Higginbotham cover and say, this is your pocket player's handbook. I'm not going to facilitate that. And that's my thing. And I think that's where, that's why I think that Drive-Thru's approach is so smart, because it's like, well, it does protect the creators, and says that, some other asshole can't come out there and say Shadow of the Devil Lord and make my own game and chase that motherfucker down. But it says, you want to play in my sandbox, you can do it within these parameters. Right. And the only thing you got to do is you got to throw like a few shekels to the guy who made the game. That for me is a system that works really well without having to just open it up. I don't think anybody else, even in the 90s, or anybody else other than Wizards of the Coast, could have done an OGL and expect to survive. I mean, can you imagine Game Designers Workshop at their heyday opening up Twilight 2000 or Traveler or whatever the fuck, and say, our game system's free, do whatever you want, and then have to do it? I mean, maybe that would have saved them. Maybe it would have killed them. I don't know.
I would put my money on that would have saved them if they could. Here's the thing about it is, you've got so many people out there, mostly fans, folks that want to participate in the system. This is why the RPGA had, you know, so many people on that would come in and write adventures basically for free, like that they just want to create something to participate. Not a lot of these folks are not going to go on to be game designers. They want to make kind of a cool adventure. They're not going to make their own system. Some of them might. And I think it benefits both the fan people who just want to participate in the story, or I've got a cool idea for an adventure, or I've got some great feats and magic items and everything else. And it also takes the people who are all like, I want to hone my craft in game design and adventure design and everything else and keep on pushing through it. It gives them the freedom to do it.
I totally.
But back in the 80s and 90s, everybody was afraid to do it.
Right. Sure.
It takes out the fear.
You couldn't make D&D content and put it up there for free without being chased down by lawyers.
Right.
And I think the tone has shifted now. I mean, I think the thing that bugs me the most is this false promise that if I open up my game to other people then just say, well, I can make riches by making it for, you know, whatever proprietary dice system Fantasy Flight decides to shit out this week. And so you know, no offense to Fantasy Flight, good people, even though your role-playing department's gone, but you did great stuff while you were there. The point is that I don't see that that's good. I think you just say, hey, you want to make adventures for Shadow the Demon Lord, and you don't want to sell it, you want to make any money on it, and you want to support the hobby, go fucking for it. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Where I am going to stop you, though, is when you say, I want to give away your rule set for free. And that's because I have to feed my fucking cats, and I have to pay my bar bills. And
he's got a lot of cats.
And I have to, you know, buy art and pay editors. It's just the way it works. Anyway.
Yeah.
We're arguing. Sort of.
I think there's, like, one thing is I think a lot of game fans out there need to realize that, you know, there's a lot of game fans who want, don't want to pay. And it's all like, well, you can't do that, right? And some of them are convinced. They're like, well, I could just make this shit up anyway. It's like, but you don't, right? And those of you who do, of course, rise up and everything else. And then they find out the thing that Rob and I have found over time is you can scrape out a living doing this, and we're quixotic by nature, but you know, you should support your creators a bit more than you have. Kickstarter hasn't helped. All of the sort of role-playing games that go up and take a loss from Kickstarter, I think ruins a lot of things that go on. So it's a hard divide. You know, people want everything for as cheap as possible, and they want as more of it that they can actually consume for as cheap as possible. And that means a lot of people are doing a lot of work and not getting a lot of pay. And that's just the reality of things. Rob's got a lot of cats and he drinks a lot of beer. I have 2 cats and I drink a lot of beer. So, and cats and beer fuel this industry in ways that people just don't understand.
I have no idea how much cats and beer fuel this
industry. Can you expand the Kickstarter comment you made? Why do you think of that?
So because Kickstarter is there, so I've talked to a lot of RPG creators who have told me, they're like, yeah, to get this Kickstarter, because they didn't do the math right, or they didn't set their goals right, and because they set it on other goals and initial offerings and everything else, rather than taking a look at their own expenses and shipping and everything else, they're like, yeah, I got my book out, but man, I had to pump $5,000 of my own money in it. And I'm like, or yeah, like,
yeah, no, I get it.
And it's just like, so you just did a lot of work for Vanity Press.
Yeah.
And that's not helping the industry, because as you know, if Rob does a Kickstarter, or I do a Kickstarter, or somebody does a Kickstarter, like, the whole thing about it is, one, yeah, we want to get the rules out there. We've got a good idea. We want people to play it and everything else, but we also have to pay rent, you know, make sure the lights stay on and the computer keeps on going so we can send the files to the printer and everything else. Like, we are not living in the lap of luxury. And some of us, like Rob, is I don't know if I'd say lucky. He's in a circumstance where, Tennessee has a much lower cost of living than, say, Redmond, Washington. And I've been able to, find ways to mitigate my costs and make sure that I can sit there and do it. But, and then we get things like conventions, or like, every once in a while you get, Steven, I really want you to come out to this convention. And I'm like, great, you got to fly me out there. You've got to feed me, and you got to give me a place to stay. And it's all like, well, why don't we just give you a free badge and you can there? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I can't lose money going to your convention. And so there's this expectation. The truth is, I speak for me, I think I speak for Rob as well, and you two, we do it because we love these games, right? We fell in love with them from an early age. We probably made terrible mistakes and decided we wanted to do this for a living.
I've made so many mistakes.
We've made so many mistakes. And then, of course, because everybody else loves it as well, they're like, well, can't you just do it for free? And it's all like, no, if you want us to spend this much time on it,
right,
you got to help us pay our fucking bills, kids, right?
Right.
And that seems to be a very alien concept to people. And you can work for a company, which both of us have done. And that's great in some ways and not so great in others. At the end of the day, the majority of the work that I've done for role-playing games is not owned by me. I can't do anything more with it unless it's under an OGL. Like, I can make Pathfinder Adventures and everything else, but I can't make a sequel for Queen and Empire, because that's all Galarian and everything else.
Right.
Like, if I have an idea to push that plot along that's a little bit different, I can't touch that. And so eventually, you want to make kind of your own legacy and your own stuff and let people play in that sandbox. Just so not only do you have a little bit more of creative control, but you get to decide how to expand it with ultimate freedom. Where when you work for a company, you usually get assigned a thing. It's like, we're going to expand it in this direction, and you can sit at a meeting and go, well, I don't know about that. That's kind of fucking dumb. And they're like, but you're going to do it anyway, Steven. And I go, yes, I am, because I want to be able to pay the bills and keep the lights on and feed
Right.
the cats and drink some beer on the weekend, or the weekday, or the afternoon, or the morning.
Day drinking, it's a thing. It's fine. Okay, I want to go back. I have a go back for Rob, because Steven said he was talking about, when we were talking about the character classes, that you have to kind of cast a wide net. You want to have enough options to have a large amount of people that want to play your game. Now, with Shadow and with Punk Apocalyptic and a lot of the license lines that you've done, do you find yourself wanting to go down a certain path and second guessing and saying, fuck, I need to open this up a little bit more. I would do it this way, but I need to catch some more flies with some honey. So, I mean, I know there are always compromises in everything artistic anybody ever does. Do you struggle with that, or do you find you have a pretty good grasp of walking that line?
Well, all right. So the easy answer is in licensed stuff, you're bound by the canon, and
Right.
And if you want to introduce something new, then you need the author's buy-in. So that's if we wanted to bring elves into Game of Thrones, for example, George would have to say, like, oh, well, here's my big treatise on why elves exist in Game of Thrones, which he's not going to do.
Yeah, and that would be an awful sit down.
Right. So, but in like Demon Lord, it's interesting. When I started, I had 12 ancestries written for that game. And when I did this big tour, and I had a stupid number of Marriott points, which let me stay at hotels as I was driving from game store to game store to demo Shadow the Demon Lord all across the Southeast. And I went out to Seattle, and I went all over the place. So I did the Demon Lord demos, and I had, I guess, 12 or 13 ancestries. And at the very end, right before I launched Kickstarter, I kind of looked at who played what. And one of the ancestries I was not convinced that I needed to be in the game was a Clockwork, because I thought the mechanics were a little wonky and characters were a little, it was a big exception to how everything else worked in the game, and I was really not happy with it. But every game table that I ran had a Clockwork in it. So I was going to cut it from the game, but then I found out that, in fact, people really wanted Clockworks in the game. And so now that I'm working on Shadow of the Mad Wizard, I'm doing the same thing, where I have 13 ancestries. I've got a vampire in a lycanthrope type thing, and I've got another Clockwork, and kind of waiting to see, as I get ready to gear up to do the wider play testing, to see what people kind of gravitate towards, to see what I'm going to actually include in the core book. At a certain point, you just kind of let go, and you let the customers demand what's going to be, what will define their experience in your game.
And I love your Clockwork.
Yeah, and people like the Clockwork.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I am constantly amazed that Warforged and Constructs as a player, race, ancestry, whatever you want to call it, is pretty universally, there is a subset of people that just love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting is you think about, like, to the Star Wars role-playing game. You go back to the D6 thing, I don't think droids were a playable option.
Jedis weren't either. Yeah, you could be a Force user.
You could be a Force user, and that was kind of, I mean, I get it, right? They were working with the 3 core films, and so if you're adhering to canon, you really can't play a Jedi because there really is only one. But but the fact that the designers said, no one really wants to play a droid, so we're not going to make this a player option. And then we turn around, and then we get fucking Warforged out of nowhere. And it's like a weird-ass story, too. It's like, well, we don't want to actually throw any more bodies in the thing, but we've got these soul-type things. We created these people, and we're gonna plate them in mithril armor that should be salvageable by other players in the group when that character dies, and then enrich themselves on the corpse of the Warforged that's in your party. Whatever. Set all that aside.
Hey, man, that's totally how I play my game now. I take body parts.
But now Warforged.
Nope.
I mean, it's like if I've got an adamantine covered Warforged and that guy goes down, man, I'm going to wipe a tear away and I'm going to pry that shit off.
Right.
But, sorry, I mean, if Johnny the Halfling gets beaten up, I might eat him if I'm running out of food. But, the adamantine plating is going to keep me in hookers and blow in D&D land for months. So anyway, the whole robot thing is, I really, in hindsight, I kind of feel like we should have probably put the Warforged as a race option in 5th edition D&D right out of the gate. I mean, we had one as an optional race in the Dungeon Master's Guide at one point, but we backed away from it. But I think in hindsight, we really should have, because, it goes back to what I was saying before, is that people's doorways to fantasy are different sizes and different shapes than what I had when I was a kid. My first experience with fantasy would have been C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and I expect dwarves and elves and gnomes are interesting because I don't know where they come from. Now it's like, well, in this manga thing, they're the dragon robot people that need to be in my D&D games because I need to feel like I could be this character. And that's cool. And it shows the evolution of the fantasy genre.
Mm-hmm.
Do you worry that with changes like that, like staying with new stuff that you're writing, that you stay relevant to younger audiences that do buy things and do actually do a lot of play online and have a real different approach than the ones we had? Is that hard, easy? Do you don't think it matters? Or
no, it's really hard because I don't really particularly care for anime or manga.
That's why I ask.
And so I don't know anything about it. Now I am a self-serving middle-aged man who makes young friends so that they can take care of me when I'm dead, unless I flee to Costa Rica in 10 years, which is also a possibility.
I got a place that will be perfect for you. We went last year. It was fucking amazing.
Oh, yeah? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I hear Costa Rica is really pet friendly, which is good because I'm going to have some surviving cats after the 10-year mark, and I want to be able to bring them with me instead of have like my cats have to be in quarantine for 6 months and then come out like, you know, embittered, hardcore prostitute smoker type people that are just like
Like
what
us.
the fuck do you do with me?
There's a little town on the Pacific coast called Montezuma, and it is literally like just this pirate touristy kind of enclave. But if you get about half a mile outside of that place, you would love it.
All right.
I think on a similar subject, I think the worst thing that folks decided, and I remember going, what the fuck was 4th edition, is like, gnomes are now monsters, right? And the argument was all like, nobody plays gnomes. And it's all like, I've had a lot of people who play fucking gnomes. So what the hell are you talking about?
Zach based a company on gnomes.
Right, yeah. And but somehow the higher ups got in their head that gnomes shouldn't be a playable race because we've already got halflings. You don't need anything else, which is the wrong thing to think about ancestries, right? Like ancestries and races and everything else, scattershot that bitch, right? I mean, there are so many people, like, you don't know what they're going to gravitate to. I put up on my Delve Patreon today dark caps, which are my fungoid people.
Mushroom
Men, and I am 90% sure I'm going to make that a playable race in Delve, just because somebody's going to want to play it. And I'm
Dude,
like, yeah.
somebody in the party is going to travel with one of those guys and be licking him 24/7.
Oh yeah,
just hoping he gets high.
I had a whole Twitter conversation with people looking for a mushroom ancestry for Demon Lord.
Yeah, because it's going to sing to somebody, and you know, and yeah, as game designers talk to younger people, because you know we get stuck in our ruts, and it's like, what do you want to play? Like, what is this game lacking? What are the things we're not seeing? Luckily, I've got a 12-year-old in the house who will give me her opinions on what kind of things, and she reads her own brand of fantasy and has ideas. When I gave her the Pathfinder playtest, she devoured those rules and started questioning our decisions. Why did you do this? Right? It was a lot of fun.
That's great.
And those conversations are sorely needed. I enjoyed it when I was teaching game design because I was in my late 30s, early 40s, and I was teaching a whole bunch of 20-year-olds. And
you froze a little bit.
I was like, back up, what is that? Right? And it's like, so in a lot of ways they taught me more about their conception of fantasy, which opened my eyes up because, if it were up to me, I'd read Conan and Joe Abercrombie all the time, and I wouldn't look into other sorts of bits.
Well, there was when Chaosium released the new artwork for RuneQuest, and they have that one picture of the lizard man kind of gonna fight the lady or something. The lizard man doesn't have shoulders like a human being. It looks like an actual lizard is on its back legs, and that immediately made me want to be a lizard man.
Right.
Because that art actually showed it like anatomically sort of correct for a walking lizard on its back legs.
And even as old fucks, like, we might see something, it's like, what the hell is that? That looks really cool, right? It's, we're not all so set in our ways that we can't find something that's really neat and interesting that we just never thought of before. And so there's a lot of gamers, especially older gamers, who do, like, they just want to play there's so many old school Revolution games that are basically just first edition D&D strapped on with some third edition mechanics. And it's all like, I just want to play the game that I played when I was 12. And that's a little alien to me because I'm like, you own that fucking game. I own that fucking game. You can just play that fucking game.
Well,
why do you need a new game of the game that you already own?
And I know there are some tangents, and this kind of shits on Pathfinder directly, but there are some people who get all twisted up about the half dragon, half vampire, were pixie you know, where your title of your character is like 4 lines on a sheet of paper.
Yeah,
And
but
I get that, but what difference does it make? If that's not your thing, don't fucking play it. But if that is
yeah,
the
it's
absolute, you know, that is the character that somebody wants to play, let them play it.
oh yeah. I think when I was younger, the first one of my players that went up to me and said, "I want to play a good drow with 2 scimitars," and it was before I read, Bob Salvador's novels. I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Right?
Right.
And as I got older, I just learned to go with the flow. Somebody wants to play a weird character in my game. I'm like, okay, let's see how we can make that happen, right? Because it is a shared experience.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the type of GM that railroads people into like, this is my vision of what fantasy should be. I mean, because, they have to go along for the ride. They need to feel a certain amount of empowerment that they're playing the character that they want to play. And so, if you've got some min-maxer who's just trying to break the rules, yeah, stop that, right? Everybody else is going to feel shitty that their character's only half-ass. But as far as diversity goes, I've had players that come to me, and like my friend Jeff Simpson, he wanted to make his own, this is back in the 2nd edition days, wanted to make his own ancestry, wanted to make his own variant of the druid class, and he wanted to do it for purely story reasons and everything else. And I'm like, okay, let's see how we can do that.
Yeah.
And even as my current game design, it's all about options. It's all about how do you make the kind of character that you want to play? Do I have the pieces that you can do that? Are they balanced well enough where it works with the system and everybody's of, somewhat equal power to work together to achieve their goals? It's one of my frustrations playing 5th edition D&D, which I do regularly. I'm doing it tonight. We're 16th level now, and it's a good system. Rob and everybody else did a great job on it, but it doesn't have, like, I still play my character the same way that I did at 1st level. I just have more spells, and I'm just like, it's really easy for me. I don't really have to think too much about the game except for the story part. Like when I go into combat, I'm like, well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and maybe ZZ, but it's lather, rinse, and repeat. But as somebody who makes games, I want a lot more variation in there. I want people to make the kind of character that they want to make that fits within the system.
But I enjoy that about 5th edition D&D as somebody who has more games than I ever have time to play in a professional setting. I like that I can go to any convention, sit down and play it and understand the framework, because I would be terrible otherwise. No one would want me to go anywhere. So that's from a selfish perspective. I love that part.
Well, it does have its benefits. Yeah, absolutely. But I think you can make a system that has more variation for character construction. And it's what we try to do in P2. And it's what I'm trying to do in Delve. That everybody gets it, but they know that there's going to be a lot of variations on themes.
Okay,
like the
so
core of it works.
Now we're back to questions, guest questions, and we'll start with Rob.
Is this a test?
This is a test. This is going to go on your permanent record.
Ah, fuck that.
Yeah, God, I would love to see my permanent record at this point.
You wouldn't. Get it, the FBI.
Rob, what is currently the RPG product you are the proudest of? And what is the one RPG product you would like to redo?
The one I'd like to redo would be the Black Company. I know more now than I did then. The one I'm most proud of, still probably Demon Lord.
That's great. I mean, that's what you want to hear.
Mad Wizard is, I'm more proud of Mad Wizard than I am of Demon Lord, but no one else has seen Mad Wizard outside of a handful of people. So it'll get out there.
Yeah, I'm waiting on that. I am interested.
It's coming.
Steven, same questions.
Oh, Jesus. Well, there's a lot of, I think you look at like a lot of like early stuff, and you're just like, oh Jesus, I could have, like, if that was me today, I'm like, oh, I've learned so much and everything else. But I think the game that I would love to revisit in a lot of ways, and maybe fight harder, and would be fourth edition. Like, there's so much in that game that I'm so very proud of, and there's so much in that game that I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ. You know, as the guy who worked at Paizo, that every Gen Con I get 5 people come up to me and say, oh, thank you so much for Pathfinder, because 4th edition fucking sucked. And it's just like, I worked on that game too, asshole. There's a lot of things that, yeah, I'm very proud of in there, but there's a lot of things that I would love to revisit. As far as I'm very proud of what we did with Pathfinder 2nd edition. There are some things in there that I'd love to be able to revisit. My passion right now is working on Delve and playtesting that. It gives me a lot of joy because I get the freedom of making the decisions I want to make and doing things that I think are very good for a play and narrative experience. But that game's not done yet. So you know, I kind of hate to put that one out for the same reason that Rob feels about Mad Wizard. Even though just about everybody I show that game to, they're like, you can do that? Holy crap. You know, and there's a lot, like, once upon a time, Rob was working at Wizards, I was working at Paizo. We would go out to bars and talk about life and philosophy and everything else, and game design, because we couldn't talk to each other about our own projects. So we ended up talking about game design, and I know those conversations, and then watching Rob do Shadow of the Demon Lord and what he did with that system really influenced Delve in a great way, including stealing part of his initiative system or the guts of his initiative system, because it's fucking brilliant. And I remember when he pitched it to me, he sent me the rules for it. He's like, take a look at this and tell me what you think. I'm not sure yet. I'm like, geez, Rob, I don't know. And he goes, well, come play it at Gen Con. And I did. And after that, or I think in the middle of that game, we went out to take a smoke break, and I was like, never mind, Rob, that fucking thing's brilliant. Like, have no doubt about it.
You paid royalties on that then?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. So.
All right. Well, so let's wrap up. Rob, please, what is something you would like to leave people with? Some thought or bit of wisdom, or just a giant hearty fuck you or something. I mean,
here's the bit of wisdom I want to impart. And this goes back to my experience at Cobalt Con, where I talked a lot about this because it was fresh in my mind. I always thought toilet wine was something that was made in a toilet bowl, but I was wrong. Instead, you put a bag with, fruit cocktail and some other things, and you stick it in the tank, and then it ferments, and then you get toilet wine. So for those revelation that are thinking about getting into the brewing, I think toilet wine could be the move of the future. Let's do it together.
Awesome.
I am not familiar with prison toilets. I know that comes as a surprise to everyone.
You would think there wouldn't be a reservoir, right?
I don't think they have an accessible tank.
So how would you make the toilet wine? That's
really
a puzzle, right?
I was always under the impression it was actually made in the bowl.
Yeah.
Learn something new.
Because there's no accessible tank. The plumbing comes directly out of the wall.
So it would have to be made in the bowl. You would have to store your bag in the bowl.
It was also my understanding from some people that I will not name on this feed that the toilet bowl is the cleanest part of a person's cell.
Oh, sure. Right.
For various reasons, such as
fermenting wine. I have a question. No.
Well, I'm gonna turn one of my toilets in my house, because I have 37 of them. Only one is actually hooked up to running water, but I might turn one of my other 36 into a toilet winery.
A bidet still?
No,
I think that would work.
Yeah. Bidet still, that could be good. It could be good.
Steven, can you top
Well,
that?
No.
Oh, your connection is breaking up right in the middle of this bit of wisdom.
You're probably happy about
I
that.
have not been to prison, just a few holding cells. So, and it's a pleasure to be on here.
Well,
mostly to hear Rob talk. I'm not going to drink it out of a fucking toilet.
I love that. Thank you both for being on here. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you two guys.
Always a pleasure talking to you guys too.
We live in a weird fucking world, and it's very perfect to have you guys on during this.
Yeah, it's always exciting to be able to light a match by just sticking it outside.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, we are going to drop the recording. Say goodbye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.